Now time to hear from our panel of experts. Amanda Cage is the president and CEO of the National Fund for Workforce Solutions, an organization working to promote an equitable future for workers, employers, and communities. Richard Johnson is director of retirement policy at the Urban Institute. I love the Urban Institute. And Susan Houseman is a labor economist and vice president director of research at the Upjohn Institute for Employment Research. Welcome to you all. But this time, I've got a question from the audience, from Michelle, that I'm going to start with, because I think it gets right at the core of something. So let's listen to Michelle for a moment.
Hi, I'm Michelle Fay. I'm founder of a financial planning firm here in Seattle, Washington. And my question is, what ideas are being pursued to help older workers confront ageism? We're in an era in which the discussion of diversity includes many marginalized groups, but not usually older people. Thanks.
Amanda, I want to start with you, because I think it's, goes right to a point about, we have all these jobs open, we've got all this talent, we've got a lot of folks that want to work, as I understand it, but there is this stigma thing out there. If you're an older worker, you don't get the same treatment across the board, I feel. But what's your view, Amanda?
Yeah, I think there's just straight up old school discrimination. We see that a lot with other types of workers, with people of color, where employers are reluctant to hire them because of discriminatory practices. I would say the other thing that really matters, though, are all of the practices that employers engage in that don't seem discriminatory on their face value, but really do have a disparate impact on older workers. So, for example, many of the older workers who are long-term unemployed, they had stable careers, right? And so they were really victims of economic shocks beyond their control. But the process for applying for jobs has really changed. Mature workers that experienced layoffs find often that they don't have the educational qualifications for similar jobs that they had earlier, and that those jobs pay less. We know, like Jane said, there's screening software designed to weed them out. Employers use employment gaps in history all the time to disqualify candidates. We know employers insist on credit checks for older workers who may have had some real financial hardship because of their unemployment. And then, we have this lack of people communication. People put their resumes into sort of this black box, and they never hear back from people. Yeah. And so there's all these other ways that that older workers really feel the impacts of discrimination.
Fascinating. Richard, I know this is a research area of yours. You've actually written on this subject. Would love to get your take on it. And along, talking about ageism in America, what do we do to dismantle it? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I agree with the other speakers that this is a problem. It is pervasive, and we know, for example, that it takes older workers much longer to become reemployed than younger workers after they lose their job. When they do become reemployed, they suffer larger wage losses than younger people. So I think there's little doubt that that age discrimination is pervasive. Ageism is probably the one discriminatory behavior that is not really as frowned upon as other things, other types of discrimination in the country. At least in Polite Company now, we don't speak disparagingly of certain groups. We know we shouldn't do that. And with older people, it's perfectly fine to mock someone for their somewhat advanced age. And when we think about policies and what policies are there to address that, what we've seen recently is actually making it more difficult to confront ageism than it was in the past. So the Age Discrimination and Employment Act outlaws discriminatory behavior in the labor market. And yet we saw a 2009 Supreme Court decision which made it more difficult to prove age discrimination, that you had to show that if not for age discrimination, you would have a job, you would have higher pay, you would have some other, you would be enjoying some other benefit. That wasn't the way the Age Discrimination and Employment Act was interpreted before 2009, and there is some legislation moving through Congress that would revert to this other standard, to this easier standard, which says that you merely need to demonstrate that age discrimination is a factor in your in this negative outcome. So that's something that might offer some hope, but it's. I would have thought the changing demographics would have made it easier. Now about 25% of the workforce is age 55 and older, and yet we see age discrimination getting worse, even as the workforce becomes older, not better.
Fast. I mean, it's depressing, but I mean, you seem to have a good realist take on it. Susan Houseman, I'm interested in this report as well, and your thoughts on this. But you've written this report, as I understand it, Policies to Improve Workforce Services for Older Americans, suggesting 7 relatively low-cost reforms that can address this subject. And I'm just interested in, one, your view on the on our questioner's question about ageism, but 2, the kind of playbook on how to reverse it, which is what I think. I haven't read your report. I'm going to go get it, but I'd be interested in your insights on this.
Let me try to give a bit of a synopsis, but let me pick up first on something that Richard said, and how do you address ageism? I think that typically we think we'll pass a law and make it again illegal to discriminate. And those laws, I used to, many years ago, taught public policy to graduate students, and it's extremely difficult to enforce those laws. It always was, and it still is, especially in the hiring process. So where do we go from here? I mean, one general approach one might think about is just helping to slowly change attitudes towards older workers. I'm going to point out a program actually being piloted in Michigan by the sponsor of this, AARP, this session, which is, I believe it's called Experience for Hire. What does it do? It really tries to tackle both inhibitions of that older workers have in going into the job market and looking for jobs, because in part because of ageism, they're tired of being turned down, or they may not know how to apply for jobs when they lose one, or going back in after some extended period of time. But also, the ageism of employers. And what are they doing? They're getting workers, and then trying to really reach out to employers who might be potentially interested in hiring them, selling them, and then it is basically it's run through job centers and matching employers with workers, and it is a job fair specifically for older workers. This could be one approach, but more broadly, there are things that could be done through our workforce services programs that could facilitate, that could help provide older workers with better services. One is to provide dedicated staff who are used to working with older workers and can help make those connections with local employers. Another is training that's been mentioned. It's by Teresa and others that older workers can be retrained. Oftentimes, the impediment to a job may be a lack of skill, and it's been shown that they can easily pick up basic technical skills that are demanded in new sorts of jobs. A third thing that I'll mention is all of our conversation so far has focused on getting jobs with employers. But actually, if you look at older workers, the rate of self-employment, or I'll just call it non-employees, they may be traditional workers, traditional self-employed, owning a business, but also independent contractors skyrockets as people get older. In fact, if we think about the difference between the gap between employment rates of more educated workers, that is the college educated and the less educated, over time, it is largely explained when people are younger by differences in rates with traditional W-2 jobs. As they age, it is increasingly explained by a difference in their ability to get self-employed or independent contractor work. There are a lot of impediments that we lay out in this Brookings report, to promoting self-employment and to helping workers get into self-employed jobs in the workforce systems that should be dealt with, removed to some degree.
Right. Well, I'm sorry.
No, I was also going to just very quickly say that self-employment or independent contractor work is on many dimensions often for older workers attractive to the degree that it gives them greater flexibility.
Really appreciate that overview, and I want to direct people to this report again, Policies to Improve Workforce Services for Older Americans. I just have a link here, so Google it and find it. It's a, I'm sure, a fascinating playbook. But let me go back to Amanda for a minute. Amanda, the National Fund for Workforce Solutions, which is out there trying to sort of look at the resources you've been tweeting to tell Congress to invest in workforce equity and skills training. This is my big question, right? We know that upskilling of Americans is vital, right? It's part of what we need to do. I can tell you that at least 10, 15 years ago, we were saying the same thing, but if you went to, to try to retrain from being in one industry to, say, trying to become a nurse or trying to, go into a different profession, the costs were exorbitant. And I don't know, I mean, we talk just sort of the free market will take care of this. Are we doing enough to give people the resources to invest in retraining? What does that picture look like? Because I want to make sure that we're not leaving out the real person, trying to retrack their lives, getting the resources. What does that world look like, and how are you helping?
Yeah, so, we often talk about reskilling and upskilling, and I want to shift the conversation a little to the supports that people need.
Right.
When we talk about long-term unemployed, we tend to underestimate the emotional toll of that unemployment. It's a very traumatic event. It's akin to like losing a loved one. And so by the time somebody has come into a situation where they're told they need to reskill, they've exhausted all their unemployment benefits, they've burned through their savings, many of them for the first time ever are contemplating assistance to cover their basic needs. And while that's all going on, their confidence is just withering, and they're being told to sell themselves to potential employers and to make sure that they upskill. And I think the programs, in addition to skilling, and skilling is really important, we need to be able to address the supports people need to be successful. And some of those include things like intensive career coaching, right? Many people are making big changes in their occupation or the industries that they're familiar with. Support groups, and I can't underestimate this, being with other people who are in your situation, like job clubs, really important. As people go through training, cohort models where they're sitting shoulder to shoulder with other folks who are, again, learning something new. Oftentimes, earn and learn models where you're already placed with an employer, so that fear of not having a job is gone. You have a job. You get to learn on the job. These are the things that I think will really be important to helping people be successful, in addition to, again, that hard skill training that everybody knows is important.
Well, thank you. We're getting close to the end here, and unfortunately, because I'd love to keep talking about this, but Richard, I'm a big believer in show and tell. I know the Urban Institute is sort of like this, and maybe Upjohn too, I don't know, but these massive centers of data and experience, and you'd be the perfect place for show and tells. I'm interested in who's getting this right. I've talked a lot to Mayor Francis Suarez of Miami, and I know that elder workers are on his radar screen of what he cares about, like trying to generate intergenerational everything in Miami. I don't know about other places and their apertures for this sort of discussion, and where you. So I'd just love to hear both from you and Susan real fast. Are there models out there you think are working that we can show off and try to replicate, or do you think it's just a mess everywhere?
Well, yeah, I think the outcomes are not very encouraging anywhere. I will say, though, that when we're talking about training, what's really important, and when training is effective, it's when you have a close partnership with employers, so that you make sure that older workers of any age, but I think particularly older workers, are training for a job that is in demand, that employers are hiring for. And so having that partnership with employers is important. Also, partnerships with community colleges can be important. We underinvest in worker training throughout the economy. It is really shameful how little we invest in that. And I think we need to invest more in older workers as well, because as has been said repeatedly now, older workers can learn. They want to pick up new skills. My research, I find that 50% of workers change occupations after age 50. So let's make it easier for that to happen.
Thank you. Susan, any quick models out there you think work? Are you as cynical as Richard?
Let me just say that we're maybe I'm as optimistic. But the policy brief that you mentioned was actually, I got a lot of input from our Workforce Services Division. Briefly, the Upjohn Institute has traditional policy researchers like myself. I head the research division, but somewhat uniquely, our institute runs WIOA programs in our part of Southwest Michigan. We got, in writing that policy brief, got a lot of input from our workforce services staff.
Right.
And some of that, and that has been recommended by us, my co-author Catherine Abraham and I, but by others as well, to get specialized services dedicated to older workers, is in proposed legislation by Marie Newman in WIOA reauthorization, and they're very excited about the possibilities of implementing these things.
Well, look, I really appreciate the candor each of you have brought to this. I know it is a very, very important topic. I've been reading some of Richard Johnson's work, and I think it's so important, and I look forward to reading the work of all of you. But I really think ageism and the kind of structural barriers to getting to fuller employment, which I'm about to discuss with the President and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, this exact same subject from a different perspective. So I want to thank you all so much for joining us. Amanda Cage, President and CEO of the National Fund for Workforce Solutions. Richard Johnson, Director of Retirement Institute at the Urban Institute. You should really look at the Urban Institute site. Susan Houseman, Vice President and Director of Research at the Upjohn Institute for Employment Research. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.